For the purposes of the recording, I'm Mary Lawrence, Senior Democratic Services Officer, Scrutiny. The first report on the agenda is the election of Chair. The purpose of this report, which starts on page 3 of your agenda packs, is to receive nominations for the role of Chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. If I take you to the report, in section 3 of the report, it advises that the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 requires that as a minimum, the chairpersons of these committees be appointed based on the size and political balance of each of the groups that make up the council. At the annual meeting of council on the 19th of May 2021, councillors Kay Rowlands, Amanda Williams and John Paul Blundell were appointed as the 3 Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee chairpersons. As the report states, the chairperson of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to be appointed by the members of this committee from one of the chairpersons of the Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committees, but it cannot be the chairperson from the same group as the executive. The recommendation is on page 5 of the report. The committee is requested to receive nominations and appoint a chairperson of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee in accordance with the provisions set out in paragraph 3.2 of this report. So please can I therefore ask for nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Do we have a seconder?
Yeah, happy to second that.
Sorry, Councillor Thomas, is that? Any other nominations?
Yes, Chair. Oh.
Sorry, did you wish to speak, Councillor Swanswick?
Yeah, please, I'd like to nominate Councillor Kay Rowlands.
And do you have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, so we'll go to a vote then. So I will read out the names of the members in attendance, and if you'll say who you wish to vote for. Just one moment, please. Okay, so Councillor Blundell.
I'm going to abstain, Meryl.
Councillor Gebby.
I'm abstaining, please, Meryl.
Councillor Gareth Howells.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands.
Myself.
Councillor Rodshaw.
Councillor Rowlands, please, Meryl.
Councillor Spanzic.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Tim Thomas.
Councillor Williams, please.
Councillor Alex Williams.
Councillor Williams, please.
Councillor Amanda Williams.
Myself, please.
Sorry, just bear with me. Right, that concludes everyone, I believe. And I'll just ask Tracy to concur with me on the scores. So I have Councillor Kay Rowlands 4, Councillor Amanda Williams 3, and 2 abstentions.
Yes, no, that's correct. I have the same.
Please can I ask Councillor Kay Rowlands to take the chair?
Oh, thank you very much, Meryl. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest with you. Yeah, apologies, Amanda. I thought Amanda was going to get the chair then, but I don't mind if members have put their back in behind me. So welcome to this Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which, due to government advice to the public to practice social distancing, will be held virtually, with the committee members and officers accessing the meeting from remote locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Please can everyone ensure that all mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda on Thursday, the 3rd of June, and for the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. I'd ask you, with the exception of myself as chair, at all times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, and which will help to minimise background noise and interference to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. You can speak if I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those being used. If any members wish to speak to or raise point of order, they should please click on the raise hand button at the top of the Teams window, and I'll come to you in turn. Please do not use the instant messaging chat to enter questions or comments. I'll now ask the Scrutiny Chair to announce the names of councillors in attendance at this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. The members of the committee in attendance are Councillor John Paul Blundell, Councillor Jane Gebby, Councillor Gareth Howells, yourself, Chair, Councillor Kay Rowlands, Councillor Rod Shaw, Councillor John Spanzik, Councillor Tim Thomas, Councillor Alex Williams, and Councillor Amanda Williams.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tracy. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from absence from Councillor Ross Penhale Thomas.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 3. Do we have any declarations of interest? If any member has an interest to declare in a matter of the agenda, please click on the raise your hand button and I'll come to you in turn. No members. Okay, item 4. Please can I have a mover and a seconder for each set of minutes? So we've got minutes held on the 20th of January. Can I have a mover?
Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Blundell. And a seconder, please.
Second. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you. And the 21st of the 1st.
Move.
I'll move them as well.
Oh.
Thank you both. And finally, minutes for the 25th of the 1st.
I'll move them as well.
Happy to second, Kay.
Thank you very much, both. And item 5 is the Cabinet response to the cross-party recovery panel recommendations. I'll now ask the officer to present the report. I'll then call upon members who indicate they wish to speak by clicking on the raise hand button in turn. The committee is requested to consider the recommendations of the cover report set out in paragraph 9.1 on page 51 of the agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is, which starts on page 49 of the agenda pack, is firstly to present the committee with the updated progress Cabinet response to the recommendations of the recovery panel, which were submitted to Cabinet in September. The recovery panel received this update response on 14th of May 2021, and it's being formally reported to this committee today as set out in Appendix A on pages 53 to 64 of the agenda pack. Secondly, to present the committee the recommendations of the cross-party recovery panel made regarding housing and homelessness at their meeting held on the 14th of May for endorsing by this committee as the parent committee to the recovery panel for onward reporting to Cabinet. I'll hand back to you, Chair, as members may have questions or comments upon Appendix A, the Cabinet response, and the Chief Executive and Leader is here as invitees to receive questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Meryl. So I think we're going to go through order of the recommendations as they start on page 53. So I'll start with recommendation 1. Do we have any questions? Councillor Williams, do you want to come in there on your first question, which was as the report as a whole? Yeah, Alex Williams, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just a general point about all of the recommendations. How do we ensure that the recommendations which have been accepted by Cabinet and closed or are still ongoing are tracked going forward? My understanding is that the COVID-19 recovery panel will now be put into hibernation, but can be re-established by this committee if necessary in the future. But it would be useful to know, how do we measure success going forward from the COVID-19 recovery panel's recommendations. You know, we were very keen originally for it not to be a talking shop, but to be constructive towards the cabinet and the local administration. So yeah, so how do we measure success and the deliverability against the panel's recommendations? That's a general point around all of the recommendations in the report.
Thank you. I'd be grateful if you'd come in now, Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Williams. Yep, a helpful question, actually. If you allow me just to give some very brief context. I mean, obviously the purpose of the cross-party recovery panel was at a point in time, and it was always intended, as I think you indicated, to be effectively a task and finish panel where there would be some closure of the panel itself. But it's a fair question about what happens from now on. And I think my answer really is that the intention is that where necessary, the matters that have been raised by you as a panel and we've given responses to should become part of business as usual. So you need to pick up those of relevance as part of your normal scrutiny activity. So clearly in some cases, and I know you've already taken an interest in housing and homelessness, in some cases there will be a necessity, won't there, to look into further depth into perhaps some of the matters that are not closed, or indeed where you feel that you need to check in on progress. Similarly, you'll notice that there's an item on cooperative council. Again, you may want to in due course consider that the principles of a cooperative council have been taken on board by the council, perhaps in line with other initiatives such as the Wellbeing Future Generations Act and the Socio-Economic Duty. I think the thing I'd say, though, is that inevitably, as part of the council's recovery, there are of course also new things and potentially more important things that you now might want to focus on and spend time on. So from my point of view, just off the top of my head, we know that health inequalities, anti-poverty, digital, the new operating model for the council, mental health, the 2030 agenda are all really, really big things that have emerged out of the end of the pandemic and are things that are exercising the organisation moving forward. So there may be new and additional things that you may think now should be prioritised, rather than perhaps inevitably one or two of the things that were very pertinent at the time, certainly when the pandemic broke out, so things like PPE and some of the initial recommendations, but inevitably now are probably less of a priority because they've been resolved. So I think my answer, Councillor Williams, is that you need to be selective, but you need to really pick out both the existing recommendations, but also perhaps some new ones, where you think that those recovery elements should deserve more focus, and they need to be picked up as part of the normal scrutiny agenda for each of the committees.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any more questions on recommendation 1? No. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to recommendation 2.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Rod. Councillor
sorry,
Shaw,
Chair.
please come in.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question on recommendation 1, and really I was allowing Mark time to answer on the general theory of cross-party recovery. My question, Mark, if I may, is question 1 asks about culture, leisure and green spaces, and the response is almost a response of islands. I think one thing we've learned from the town centre development plans is the value of green spaces within towns. Can I ask if there's going to be any reproportionment of budgets to allow the communities department to re-green or revamp other spaces other than Halo, Arwen and the parks and playing fields?
If I may, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I think it has to be an holistic response. So certainly part of our response is about leisure centres, is about culture, and is about facilities, sports facilities in schools. But you are right that, for example, as part of the Bridgend Master Plan, the intention is that we also try and create additional green spaces where we can within town centres. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's really a recognition that the value of culture and leisure and green space has probably been one of the key things, hasn't it, that's come on the back of the pandemic, and the recognition that things like our footpaths are incredibly valuable, and how do we maintain those going forward. So I think that's certainly the ambition. In terms of your specific question about whether budgets will be amended or done in a different way, of course that's in your hands really. That's a matter for council when you set your budgets, but I think one of the things that the recovery panel's recommendations will do is inform budget processes moving forward, and perhaps historically where it might have been that something might have been regarded as less important. I think now perhaps you'll see it through a slightly different lens, and perhaps things that are not as obviously priorities will become things that we want to invest in and refocus on, particularly when, as I mentioned, there's a really significant change, isn't there, in the way that people live their lives, go to work, or indeed don't go to work, perhaps work at home. And I think all of that is quite a complex equation. But I think the investment in culture, leisure and green spaces is certainly recognised already. I could give you, I won't, but I could give you a long list of investments over recent years, particularly in school sports facilities, but obviously Mountain Town Hall, Grand Pavilion and so on. So I think that will continue, but it's the other parts that you mentioned as well, which may become more important as well. And I think already in the capital programme, there's a very significant investment programme around refurbishing play areas. And I know that's not always in towns, but some of them are. But also I think just more informal green space will become a really important part of what we do moving forward from a planning point of view. So again, the LDP consultation has just started. I anticipate that a number of the responses there will be to do with green space and the support for keeping green space as well. So I think it's part of that complex equation, but I think what I hope I've demonstrated is that commitment overall for the authority to prioritise that.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Thomas, can you turn your camera off, please?
Yeah, Chair, yeah, I've better seen Councillor Thomas picking his nose on camera.
Councillor Thomas, can you turn your camera off, please? Thank you. Leader, did you want to come in?
Yeah, if I can, please. Thank you, Chair. But it was, first of all, just in response to Councillor Williams' question. It was a very good question around some of those recommendations. Many of those recommendations have been completed. Some are ongoing. We do have in place quarterly business review arrangements where scrutiny are involved, and we obviously consider the priorities and the action points from the corporate plan. So what we can certainly do is look to see whether any of those ongoing actions could be incorporated into those routine scrutiny and quarterly business review arrangements. So we'll look to do that. And then I think that Councillor Shaw's made a really good point and asked a really pertinent question around green spaces, and that's been reflected actually in discussions we've had with local members in the feedback around the plans for Salt Lake in Porthcawl, and the need for us to ensure that the green spaces are integral to that regeneration. So there's plans there to extend Griffin Park, which is already in the town, but also looking to see how we can further develop, even if it's very small green spaces, because it's also clear that that people value even the smallest of open green spaces, don't they? And particularly in urban in environments where people don't have green spaces right on their doorstep. So we'll look to do more of that as we consider further plans right across the borough, and making sure that green space is of the highest quality as well, and we consider the ecological value of any green space that we want to extend and enhance, because we've got a duty actually to promote biodiversity. So that's also a feature of our planning going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor David. I appreciate that we can put it into the quarterly performance reviews. Not everybody on this meeting though will be a part of those meetings, so there may be some questions still on the recommendations that may come out of this meeting. So I'll continue through the recommendations for now, if I may, and I'll make a note that we'll put them on the quarterly performance review. So I'll move to recommendation 2. Are there any questions?
I've got my hand up for recommendation 1 still, sorry.
Apologies, bear with me. Councillor Williams, please.
Right, yeah, thanks very much. Two parts to this. Firstly, we're looking at the green spaces and we're looking at rights of way. What are we doing as a council? Because I'm sure, I know we said we set the budgets, but costs would have increased because the number of people who are using rights of way now. And obviously the clearing of such areas, but also the referrals have increased. With people complaining or of issues with rights of way. When we put a referral into officers, it's taken months and months and months because they are absolutely swamped. So what are we doing to ensure we've got enough staff in there? And the other thing, you talk about Arwen and you talk about the green spaces. What are we doing to ensure that Arwen aren't handing back green spaces? Because if you look at Litchard Park, I understand they've recently handed that back to the council. So that's additional cost for us that we have to maintain. If we're relying on Arwen, what are we doing to ensure that they are continuing with our green spaces and not just going to hand them back? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I don't know who wants to answer that.
I will, Chair, if I may. First, on the specific issue of Litchard, that's actually a legacy issue, Councillor Williams, of a previous MTFS cut on Arwen before the pandemic. Potentially unfortunate in view of what's happened subsequently, but that was, we took money off Arwen actually on that basis, and therefore they reviewed what they could manage in terms of their management fee. But I don't think they have any wider ambition to hand green space back. I think actually they're a valued partner and are working with us very effectively. So I don't, for example, I don't know whether you've been to Bringarrow Park recently, and some of the investment and improvements up there to improve the park there are really very impressive. In terms of the rights of way, I think there's almost two separate problems there. We have a fundamental problem with all member referrals, that the number of member referrals overall has nearly doubled, possibly as a consequence of the way we're all working. So we no longer bump into each other on an informal basis. So I think an awful lot more gets logged formally. So there is a review ongoing about the whole member referral system. Taking a little bit longer than everyone intended because of the pandemic, but part of that solution will inevitably be there'll be more self-help for members in terms of links and being able to find out information by accessing links on the website. But we are, in the meantime, we have increased the resource, for example, in rights of way. It's a recognition really of the increased demand that you've described, which is undoubtedly true. And with the increased demand comes an increased number of queries really about the clearance of things like hedges and broken gates and all that goes with it. So there is a backlog, unfortunately. We have increased the resource, but of course we have to do all of this within the finite resource that we have. But again, come back to the point I made to Councillor Shaw, really, I can imagine that some of the priorities moving forward may well change based on what we now know as a result of the pandemic. So it may well be that moving forward in future budgets that members have a view that things like rights of way and things like green space and other contributory factors to this particular agenda item may deserve a higher priority. But of course that always comes with choices, doesn't it, about what do we not invest in. But I certainly get the mood from members, both not just in this meeting, but actually separately, where people have written to me that people feel that there needs to be a greater focus and a greater investment on this kind of thing. And of course that can be something that can be fed through the budget process and indeed through BREP as part of informing that process.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Thomas, did you want to come in on recommendation one?
Just to echo Councillor Amanda Williams' comments, really. I mean, rights of way have been a major frustrating issue for both myself and many of my constituents, really. I understand one of my constituents has written to Mark quite a few times, and I know, we've all got priorities, but getting daily phone calls. So I'm just echoing Councillor Williams's comments, and some of the rights of way that have been identified to me, it hasn't just been a problem over the pandemic period. Some of these have been inaccessible for numbers of years, and some of that is down to landowners padlocking gates and things like that. So I'm hoping that's something that we can look into. But previously it was my understanding that it was a staffing issue which was causing the main backlog, and now we've recruited a search officer. Can Mark just confirm to me that we now have adequate staffing levels to tackle these problems? Staffing and resources now to tackle these backlog of problems with rights of way.
I'm not sure I could ever confirm that we have adequate resource, because I suspect that most of the organisation could do with more resource, but we certainly have more resource. We've recognised the problems that have been described by both Councillor Williams and yourselves, and we've put additional resource in there. Whether that is sufficient moving forward, I suppose, remains to be seen. What I would say, and this comes back to many years of disinvestment in things like rights of way. So over many years, the total size of the team there was reduced quite significantly. Perhaps when, rightly or wrongly, perhaps when things like rights of way were deemed as less important. I suppose the point I was trying to make is that post-pandemic, I think there's a wider recognition of the value of things like rights of way, and therefore we're not just trying to respond to the current position. We're probably trying to mitigate many years of disinvestment in things like rights of way. So that's a particular service area that, if you look back at budget cuts over the last 6 or 7 years, you'll find on a fairly regular basis there was a disinvestment in rights of way, which reduced the overall capacity of the staffing, but also the overall capacity to be able to deal with issues on rights of way, hence the significant backlog. So I couldn't guarantee, no, that we have absolutely the amount of resource to do everything that members would want, but unfortunately that's the position for a lot of the organisation. We still have huge pressures in social care, for example, which members would generally say is one of our priorities. Whether we have enough staff there would be another moot point. But what I can say is that we've recognised the pressures, we've increased the resource, and of course we will review that position moving forward. And if and when it becomes apparent that is insufficient, well, again, as part of the budget process, there will be a decision to make, won't there, about whether you wish to make further investment in that area, or indeed, and if you do, what is it that you wish to disinvest in, which I know is always the more difficult bit.
Thank you. I believe that's a fair response. Councillor Thomas, are you happy with that response, or content with that response?
Well, for now, yeah. I mean, we'll have to see what happens, won't we? I mean, it is a question I put into full council, so perhaps we can explore it a little bit more, that opportunity. But for now, yes. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. I've got no more hands up for recommendation 1. So anything on recommendation 2? No. I've got recommendation 3.
Sorry, my hand was slow going up for 2.
Oh, apologies. Councillor Williams, please come in.
Yes, I just wanted to ask how far this training, we're looking to extend this training, because I think Mark Drakeford announced in the press this week that social distancing is potentially going until at least the end of the calendar year. And obviously with furlough, when that eventually comes to an end, we should see more people going back into the office, back into work. So are we going to be extending this training potentially, if it's needed, to coincide with that? Thanks.
If I may, Chair, I think, Councillor Williams, the key thing is the last point you made, if it's needed and if it's now the priority. So I think what the Economic Development Unit have said is that they will liaise with not just businesses, but the third sector and charities as well, and determine what now the priority is for training. And there's certainly a commitment to provide the necessary training, but it may well be that there are other things now which those organisations feel are more valuable. But the commitment to continue to work with them and to provide adequate training for whatever's necessary based on the current pandemic restrictions is absolutely there. And therefore, I think there'll be a programme of work that will emerge from that liaison.
Thank you. Are you satisfied, Amanda Williams? Councillor Williams?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I've got no more hands up on recommendation 2. So recommendation 3. If there's nobody else, I had one point on here, but I think, in fairness, both the leader and Mark has already suggested that we look at it in the quarterly reviews, but I'll pop it on record for now. With regards to recommendation 3, which is on page 55, it was the recommendation was to provide all care providers with appropriate PPE. Obviously, there was a huge concern when the pandemic first arose, and although we've got procedures in place now, can you tell us about those procedures to make sure there's no future shortage?
Yeah, again, I think it was a very valid concern at the outset, and certainly a concern we shared at the outset about having adequate PPE. Subsequently, I have to say that Welsh Government have coordinated and funded this very well. We now have a central store all providers, not just council providers, have access to PPE by making an order through that store, and we coordinate that process. And to the best of my knowledge, that's worked very successfully, certainly since last autumn. And so I'm reasonably comfortable that the current system works well. That's certainly the feedback we get from our providers. So I think at the moment that isn't a concern, but clearly it was at the time that the panel raised it. But I think that's been properly covered off, and I'm confident it's now managed well.
That's very reassuring. Thank you. Do we? Oh, Leader, please come in.
Oh yes, sorry, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that we do have a stock pile, and that stock pile is very, very high actually. So even if the regular supplies that comes through were to stop for whatever reason, then we have a stockpile. And in addition to that, I know that both UK government and Welsh government have worked closely with industry to ensure that we now have suppliers in this country that are able to manufacture and produce the PPE, because one of the challenges that we faced, and it was a global challenge for most countries across the world, is that a lot of the suppliers were overseas and weren't as reliable, obviously, as if the suppliers were in this country. So I think they're the two assurances that we have got around the future provision of PPE, and of course that has been provided free of charge to care providers in Wales as well. So I know that's been of particular help to the third sector and independent providers in social care. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Az. Very reassuring, particularly as we're looking at a third wave as well, and obviously all the new variants, and we still don't know what's going on. Okay, thank you very much. I've got no more questions on recommendation 3. Anything on recommendation 4? No. Recommendation 5? And I'll move to recommendation 6. There was questions on recommendation. Councillor Williams, please.
Hi, yeah, my question on this was, I know we've put, sorry, me or sorry. Alex?
Oh, apologies. Amanda Williams, please, first.
Sorry. Yeah, mine was, I know noted that the part of it is closed, the COVID plan for the health board, we've met with them, but are we content that it's closed? What are we doing with regards to the catch-up plan? Because whilst the initial issues with COVID were dealt with, and you were meeting with the health board, surely there's been a knock-on effect, for example, with the care packages we've had to provide as an authority, and more residents being cared for at home rather than in hospital, which has impacted on us. So I just wanted to make sure that it's not closed, that there is an ongoing dialogue to resolve all these issues.
Yes, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the original recommendation was about getting copies of the primary and secondary healthcare plans. So in a sense, that's closed because we moved on from there. But you make a very valid point that there are ongoing meetings on a weekly basis, actually, with the Chief Executive and the Chair of the Health Board and senior members of staff, which are now much more looking forward, as you say, really, about, well, how do we recover from that? So in hospital terms, we know there are significant waiting lists that built up during the pandemic. We know that elective surgery has fallen behind. And so what we're working with the health board on is more those plans and how is that going to be addressed moving forward. And there's a whole range of things that fall out of that, really. So we were in a meeting literally yesterday, Leader, and Leader may want to build on this, where we were talking about moving forward the role of A&E and how is that going to be dealt with moving forward, and are there going to be minor injury clinics, the role of GPs? So I think there's a whole holistic conversation going on about how does health and more generally, us with them, recover from the pandemic, recognising, as you just said, Chair, that there might still be a third wave, so let's not pretend that it's over. But clearly there's now a greater emphasis and more resource being throwing into what happens over the next 2 or 3 years, really, to ensure that we can get back on an even keel. So yes, to reassure you, it's closed in the sense of the specific request for those copies of the COVID plans, but actually there's a bigger piece of work moving forward, which I anticipate will be ongoing for a number of years, really.
You're on mute.
Councillor Williams, are you satisfied with that response?
Yes, thanks.
Alex Williams, please.
Thanks, and the Chief Executive has kind of answered my question, to be honest. I understand that, you know, the recommendation has been resolved because you've obtained the plans for primary and secondary care. I suppose I wanted a little bit more of an expansion on what material impact these plans had on us as a local authority. So I don't know whether there's anything additional you'd like to add on that, but if not, then that's fine. But I just wanted to add that point.
I think the leader wants to come in. Perhaps the leader can respond to that one.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you for those questions. Welsh Government have announced an extra 13 million for Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board to help tackle some of the backlogs that resulted from the pandemic, and that's funding for both mental and physical health, which I welcome, because clearly that is a huge priority for us is mental health as well as physical health. And we will be working with the health board and supporting them in delivering on that agenda, because it is a whole system approach, as colleagues have alluded to, and obviously there have been significantly increased pressures on our social services, because obviously lots of people who are discharged from hospital require care packages. We'll also need to consider the impact of long COVID as well, and I know again that's been raised by colleagues. So we will work closely with the health board on those plans, and in addition to the 13 million, funding has been provided through the Welsh Government's hardship fund, and that's obviously been reported to Cabinet and then to Council, and that fund is still available and is providing support to both our directly provided services and to our commissioned services in social care. But the anticipation is that those pressures will only grow, actually. Sadly, I don't think the view is that they're going to stop once the pandemic has ended, and there will be long-term, very long-term impacts from COVID on individuals, but also on the system, because of the capacity that we've lost over 14 months. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Williams, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to come back? Oh, you've gone. Okay.
No, sorry, I put it down now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mark has kind of answered my question, really, but I'll say it anyway. I am reassured that there's going to be continued dialogue, obviously, but I raised concerns with Cwmtaf even before the pandemic about access to primary healthcare in the Valley's Gateway area in light of quite substantial housing development. And I even went up to their HQ in Abercynon, had an excellent meeting with their chair, Professor Marcus Longley, had a good meeting, or at least what I thought was a good meeting. And I followed this up. This was a couple of years ago. I followed this up with subsequent letters. I'm just getting warm words about access to primary care. That they're saying they're going to be consultations about increasing Tynacoid. I haven't seen any evidence of this consultation, but hopefully this will continue. I do appreciate the pressures they're under with COVID, but obviously access to primary care is essential. We've given the added additional challenges because of COVID. So I'm just hoping that there can be increased dialogue in terms of access to primary care. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. That sounds like it's something that needs further scrutiny on probably a different level. But Chief Exec, if you could come in, please.
Only to reiterate what you said, I think it probably does, but I'm just to reassure Councillor Thomas, I'm happy to raise that at the meeting next week. I genuinely don't know the answer specifically to the Valleys Gateway primary care issue, but I'm happy to raise it at our meeting next week.
Just come back in there, Chair, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I won't labour the point, but just in light of the quite large development in Tondy, there was initially plans for a medical centre that was subsequently dropped, and it now looks like one of the proposals is that Tinnacoid is going to be expanded. So, you know, if that helps with any contextual information with your conversations with the health boards, that'd be great. And if you could feedback, Mark, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. That's a very good, valid contribution. Leader, you popped up then. Did you want to come back in?
Yeah, only to add that obviously we're seeing major investment, probably the biggest single investment we've seen in primary health care, certainly since I've been a member in the new Sunnyside development, which will serve much of Bridgend Town. So modern new primary health care facilities there, and that is of course in addition to the new healthcare facility that we have in Porthcawl, which is state of the art as well. So we've seen that investment in primary healthcare across the borough, but we need to see more, and certainly there is reference indeed in the local development plan to the need for greater capacity in the Valleys Gateway area, and proposals around addressing that, and we will be having further discussions with the health board around that, because we know it is one of the most important issues for the public and for us as elected representatives, that when we are considering major developments or are considering the LDP, that the primary health care is planned for as much as any other infrastructure. So that is an area that we'll continue to discuss with the health board and have specific discussions about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Leader. I've had no further questions from our pre-meeting, but I'll continue to run through just in case there is any more. We've got recommendation 7. No. Number 8. Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, it's the one I raised in the pre-meeting about homelessness. Do we anticipate a rise in homelessness after furlough ends, and also the rules on evictions change? Because there's potentially a lot of people who will be found in a tricky situation when landlords can once again evict. So what's our plans for that? Thanks.
If I may, Chair, again,
please.
My understanding is that you did, as certainly the cross-party recovery panel did look at housing and homelessness separately. So you may have covered this in more detail elsewhere. Two things I wanted to say. First of all, for the time being, the Welsh Government financial support to support local authorities with homelessness issues continues. I suppose my concern moving forward is if at a point that additional enhanced support ends, then there is an increased burden on the authority, because there's an expectation now that we will be able to deal effectively with all homeless people in our area. I think the point you raised, there is the potential for that, isn't there? From circumstances, there is the potential for the number of homeless people to raise and the pressure on our services to rise as well. So again, we're geared up at the moment to try and address the issues that we are aware of adequately. I think, again, moving forward, if that significant increase in demand occurs, then we would be looking to Welsh Government again to be saying, well, you know, you need to resource this, you need to fund this properly. If there's going to be an additional burden on the local authority, it's a little bit of an unknown, isn't it? And I say I don't know in how much detail you covered this with Martin and Lynn in your other session. Perhaps some of your recommendations that I saw in Appendix B may have fallen out of those conversations. So I think this is probably an example, Chair, where Councillor Alex Williams raised earlier, there's some matters that will need to be considered moving forward. I would say this is probably one where I would suggest that there probably does need to be an ongoing look at homelessness and how the authority copes, because there are still those unknowns. There is that potential, as Councillor Amanda Williams has said, there is that potential for increased demand. And we do know that if that increased demand does happen, there'll be an increased demand on our services and an increased financial burden. So it's probably one you do want to keep on your agenda moving forward.
Thank you, Chief Exec. I'm just looking to see if it's a specific recommendation on the Appendix B. I think it just covers the overall wider aspect of homelessness. So I'll pop that on to look at a little bit further, Councillor Williams, if that's okay.
Yes, thanks.
I'm moving on to recommendation 9. No. 10. Excuse me. I don't think, can anybody raise their hands if they've got any further questions on any further recommendations? Councillor Blundell, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me just lower my little yellow hand. Fabulous. All right, it's down at the bottom at recommendation 16. It is about the cooperative councils, and basically my question is, why? Why have we not joined the cooperative councils? We're going to take some of the principles that relate to it. Why aren't we just signing up? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blundell. I mean, the leader may want to come in as well. It was discussed at length at Cabinet CMB, and I think it came down to really a discussion about the added value of going through the formal process and the requirements of that formal process when we already had, certainly post-pandemic, a plethora of existing programmes that we knew we were committed to delivering. So I think it was felt it would be a sensible and proportionate move, recognising that a lot of the principles of a cooperative council are also aligned with things like the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, socio-economic duty, you know, things like the involvement of local people, and that we would observe how that went over the next year. And if it was deemed a political priority post-election, whoever the ruling administration was at that point could make it so as part of their priorities moving forward. So that was the discussion we had. I think it's just sometimes, it's not just to do with cooperative councils, there's sometimes a whole range of things that if you proceed to the formal award, which can have some value, the formal recognition, often there's a lot of work involved in that compared to simply abiding by the principles and pursuing things in a way that are consistent with the cooperative council. So that was the discussion we had, but the leader may want to add specifically on that.
Do you want to come in, leader?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to add that I don't know if we had a price, because there's also always not always, but sometimes there's a financial contribution required. What we considered to be the more important action is that we act as a cooperative council rather than simply signing up to being one, isn't it? Because there's a big difference there, and it is about how you act and the values, and I think we've got a reasonable track record on it in terms of us working with Halo in terms of the development of Arwen and working with our town and community councils. So I think those values are there. What we will do though is think about whether there's more action that we can take rather than simply signing up and saying we're a cooperative council. So we can take that one away again and give some thought to that. And if people have examples of actions that they think that we should consider, if members have some suggestions, more than happy to look at those, because I think the ethos is an ethos that we would all share, but it's around the real tangible action. That's where our focus. That's why I know your focus would want to be as members, rather than simply saying, "Oh, look at us, we're a cooperative council." I know I'd rather say this is what we're doing as a cooperative council. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Blundell, was there any particular actions that that you wanted specifically addressing straight away?
No, it was mainly to hear that it's good to hear that the leader and the chief exec are both impassioned to do more about working cooperatively, because I think it is the way forward for local government. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Spanswick, is it on item 16? I don't want to be jumping around too much on the agenda.
No, it's item 15 before that.
Okay, Councillor Shaw, did you want to come in on item 16?
Peculiarly, Chair, thank you. It's 15. I was interested.
Oh, right. Okay. If I could bring Councillor Spanswick in first, then please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. It's item 15 about the disposal of surplus council land, and I accept the sort of comments and the response there, but I still have some concern that partly maybe because the response will be written from a financial angle, because the comment in the second paragraph is that if there is a council policy for planning to identify more land for affordable housing, this will potentially negatively impact on capital receipts, which I accept, and hence delivery of other corporate programmes, unless there is a mechanism to fund a gap from Welsh Government. It's more than that though, really. I think there is a principle, if we have surplus land, there are other powers that can be used to perhaps release that land at nil cost, build social housing. So I still think that needs exploring further, because it's an answer, but it seems to be passing the answer back to Welsh Government. And I think there are mechanisms and there are powers and legislation within our current gift that could be used to release land for social housing without having to worry too much about the money. That is the big problem, the cost of the land.
If I may, Chair, it might just be helpful if I explain a little bit more around this, because I think that you genuinely understand where members are coming from, and certainly in previous conversations, the likes of Councillor Shaw, we've covered this. So there is a requirement for the authority to achieve best value, or best consideration in terms of land disposal. But I take your point. There are ways and means about how you demonstrate what that best value or consideration is. I think the point being made, the financial point being made there, is clearly when the authority sits or owns on a very valuable piece of land, you'd have to think very carefully about giving that away free, because that might not be prudent. But we also know that there are various, perhaps smaller pieces of land, certainly in some of our valleys areas, where the reality is that there will not be a significant financial value. In fact, there'll be little market demand. And I think it's in those cases where I think we have a disposal strategy, but in those cases, I think that's where a different way forward can be considered and indeed promoted, really, where we can potentially look at not seeking any financial value for that land and seeing the value being the beneficial use of that land moving forward for whatever that is, whether it's social housing or whether it's green space or whatever it might be. And I think, therefore, there is that commitment to do that. I think the bigger challenge actually is, again, our resourcing within corporate landlords to do all of that for often small pieces of land throughout the county borough, when they also have significant priority programmes for very large regeneration schemes. But the principle, I've discussed with a number of members, and I'm absolutely with it, because what we have otherwise are areas of land, certainly in our valleys areas, that sit there for many, many years with no prospect of development, and of course they simply deteriorate and decay, don't they? And they can become to look unsightly. So so that's the explanation. I absolutely agree with you. I don't think every piece of disposal land has to seek a financial value, but I think there has to be a social value or some value that we can demonstrate to the community in exchange for giving it away free.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thank you, Chair.
On mute. You're on mute, Kay.
Apologies. Thank you both for that question. Councillor Shaw, please.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, Councillor Spanswick has preempted almost exactly the question, and the Chief Executive has alluded to the conversations we've had in the past. I think, given the response there on recommendation 15, those 3 paragraphs almost counteract each other, and best consideration is the expression used. It doesn't necessarily mean the biggest financial reward, if you like, in terms of cash. And now, the issue, I think, again, the Chief Executive has alluded to, that the corporate landlord isn't a huge department, and they naturally concentrate on those areas which can produce the greatest revenue for the council. But over a period of time, that increases the deprivation, if you like, as Mark suggested, in the valleys areas, where there's very small pockets of land that could be released very quickly if it was given any priority at all. So Jonathan Parsons in planning has acknowledged the challenge, if you like, on the LDP and the developing LDP. Mark, thank you for acknowledging the issues in the valleys and other disparate areas. But I think there is a balance needed sometimes with the greatest financial return on large schemes, and that paying some attention to valleys by just disposing of some of the smaller plots that we hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Very valid. Do you want to come back in, Chief Exec? Okay, Leader.
Oh, thanks for that, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to come in. I agree with Councillor Shaw and Councillor Spanswick about the importance of best value in its widest sense. So it's not just financial value, and the importance of our valleys and the importance of regenerating our valleys. And as a cabinet, we've certainly made it clear that one of our priorities, and again, I know it's a priority that will be shared by all members, is that we see further development of sites, particularly small and large brownfield sites in our valleys communities that can enable new homes to be developed, and that should not be a barrier or constraint. Land value. Of course, it isn't just about the purchase price and value of the land. Actually, that can be a secondary consideration in many of our valleys communities. Actually, the biggest cost will be construction and site remediation, if there's different levels, if it's a brownfield site, they can be the bigger costs. But as a cabinet, we've made it clear that we don't think that potential capital receipts should be a constraint in terms of housing and redeveloping brownfield sites. But in any of our communities, it's about securing a developer, getting a developer on board to bring some of these sites forward. We're hoping that there can be further progress through the success. I hope there's a success at the Valleys Task Force, and more funding has been made available, and we'll also look at opportunities around the social housing grant. However, that is oversubscribed, and there is a long pipeline of projects in the social housing grant. But again, we will be looking to see what opportunities there are for further developments of our brownfield sites and in our valleys communities as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Shaw, did you want to come back in?
If I could just respond to that one, that would be very useful. Thank you very much. The key, I think, is the expression that the leaders used there, that finding a developer who's interested. And with some of the very small sites, which are BCBC owned, if you like, and could be released, given the resources at corporate landlord, those sites could be just made available for small builders and self-build, which I know that on the LDP was mentioned, and actually put forward as a very viable proposal for some of these smaller sites. So it's not always about finding a developer before a site is released. They're not all brownfield sites, and there are alternative routes should these small parcels of land be made available. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Very valid point. Chief Exec, please.
Yes, just to conclude this part of the discussions, I think there's been some very valid points made. I suppose you'd expect me to just say, though, that I think all of these things come back, though, to the priorities of the organisation and the priorities of the council. So I think in our short time together this morning, we've heard perhaps demand for additional resource in rights of way, additional resource in homelessness, additional resource in corporate landlord. I make the point only to say, because I think all of the arguments on all those three areas are really valid, but that's the challenge. We have to determine ultimately what are our priorities. So if we're going to determine that we want to put additional resource into corporate landlord, well, you know, that's often a tough budget ask, when at the same time we're often protecting education, protecting social care, we're doing all the things that we ordinarily do. So I think they're all valid concerns. They should all be looked at in some detail, but the overall challenge for all of us is ultimately how do we afford all of the things we want within a finite budget. And I say that not to be a killjoy at the end, but just because it has to be a sense of realism on these things as well. I mean, there's nothing I'd like more than be able to tell you straight away that we'll put in 2 extra staff in each of those areas and everything will be fine. But of course, it's always a challenge to try and find the resource to do everything that we want to do.
Did you want to come back in, Leader? Your hand's still up.
Apologies, no, sorry.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
Chair, but Councillor Shaw's made an important additional point around those very small sites as well, actually, because there is a lot of demand in our valleys communities for new housing. Thanks.
Yeah, perhaps Councillor Shaw could point out those particular sites and take them forward with you as future ideas. Thank you. So that was that's all the recommendations. If there's no further questions on the recommendations, I've got no hands up, so I believe the Leader and Chief Exec aren't needed for the next item. So I'm thank you very much for attending. If you need to leave.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bye
all the
now.
best. Thank you.
Thanks all for your contributions on that. It's very, very valid. So item 6, I'll ask the Scrutiny Officer to present the report. It's for Corporate Parenting Champion nomination report. I'll then call upon members who indicate if they wish to speak in turn.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just go back to the second appendix of item 5, just to formally present the recommendations of the cross-party recovery panel made on housing and homelessness, Appendix B. That's before the committee for endorsing so that it can be reported to Cabinet.
I formally move that, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Blundell. Thank you both. So now, sorry, apologies. We'll move on to item 6 now. If you could present the report, please, Meryl.
So item 6, the Corporate Parenting Champion nomination report. The report begins on page 67 of the agenda pack. The committee is asked to nominate one member as its Corporate Parenting Champion to represent the committee as an invitee at meetings of the Cabinet Committee Corporate Parenting. The role of the Corporate Parenting Champion is to represent their Overview and Scrutiny Committee in discussions regarding items relating to children in care and care leavers. So I'm asking for nominations from members of the committee for one nomination.
Councillor Williams, please. Alex Williams.
Thanks. I'd like to nominate Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Do you have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, no other nominations?
Okay, Councillor Thomas. Are you happy to accept the position?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great.
Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. That's fantastic. Okay, item 7, the nomination to the Public Service Board Scrutiny Panel. Again, please can you present the report, Meryl?
Certainly, Chair. So the report starts on page 71 of the agenda pack. The purpose of this report is to request the committee to nominate 3 members to sit on the Public Service Board Scrutiny Panel. The background to this is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 introduced statutory public service boards across each local authority area in Wales and the statutory scrutiny of the PSB. The authority designated the PSB Scrutiny Panel, which sits under the remit of this committee for that purpose. And the panel will hold up to 2 meetings a year and make its recommendations to this committee for approval before reporting to the PSB. Just for some context, last year's appointees were Councillors Nora Clark, Kay Rowlands and John Spanswick. And we also have nominees from SOC 1, 2 and 3, one from each. So I'm just asking for 3 nominations from members of the committee to sit on the panel, please.
Thanks very much, Meryl. So Councillor Spanswick is self-nominated to stay on the panel, which I was grateful for. Councillor Gareth Howells, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to formally nominate or if necessary, second Councillor Spanswick if that needs to be done through the formal procedure, Chair.
If you could nominate and then we could have a seconder,
Yeah,
please.
I'll formally nominate then. Thanks, Mara.
I'll formally second then.
Thank you.
A further nomination as well, we need 3.
I'm happy to put my name forward and stay on the panel if needed.
We have hands up. Are they legacy?
Councillor Spanswick, please.
I want, okay. Yeah. Chair, I'm not sure. Are you already on there as chair? I'm not sure
No, that's Councillor Williams is.
Right, okay. Yeah, so I'd happily support Councillor Rowlands and perhaps also propose Councillor Rowlands and Councillor Shaw, because Councillor Shaw pointed out he'd still like to be on the panel but not chair.
Do we have seconders for those nominations, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you.
Both nominations. Thank you.
So is the committee agreed? We have Councillor Spanswick, Rowlands and Shaw then.
Agreed, yeah. No hands up, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll move on to item 8, which is the forward work programme. Been looking through this in detail with Meryl. I'm not sure how much movement there is on this, Meryl. We've come up with some things that we need to discuss for the future recommendations, but I'm not sure if it's for this panel. So what I've got is long-term, the long-term.
Chair,
Sorry,
if I could suggest,
please.
If I just introduce what's before you to start with.
Yeah.
The forward work programme today begins on page 75 of the agenda pack. The Council's constitution requires the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to develop and implement a forward work programme for the committee. And the constitution also provides for each subject overview and scrutiny committee to propose items for the forward work programme, having regard to the Council's corporate priorities, risk management framework, and then this committee would prioritise. The forward work programmes need to be manageable to maximise the effective use of limited time and resources of scrutiny committees. So it's not possible to include every topic proposed. Successful scrutiny is about looking at the right topic in the right way, and members need to be selective while also being able to demonstrate clear arguments for including or excluding topics. Within the report, there are a number of sort of suggested criteria for accepting and prioritising topics, and also some reasons for rejection. Following the approval of the schedule of scrutiny committee meetings at the annual meeting of council on the 19th of May, the scheduling of standing statutory reports to scrutiny committees upon the medium-term financial strategy, performance, corporate plan, budget monitoring, etc., were mapped to the appropriate meeting dates into a draft forward work programme. The draft outline forward work programme attached to Appendix A for this committee has been prepared using a number of different sources, including corporate risk assessment, directorate business plans, previous scrutiny committee work programme, report topics or minutes with actions in, committee and member proposed topics, policy framework, cabinet work programmes, discussions with corporate directors, and the performance team regarding the timing of performance information being available. The actual subject overview and scrutiny committee draft forward work programmes will be reported to the next meeting of this committee, with the comments from each respective subject overview and scrutiny committee for coordination and oversight of the overall forward work programme. And the subject overview and scrutiny committee's forward work programmes will be included in the standing forward work programme update from then on, with feedback from each SOC meeting in each cycle. It's probably worth noting that many of the items for the COSC forward work programme attached are statutory policy framework items, but I just wanted to point out this isn't the end of the journey. This is the beginning of the journey. There's plenty of room on the work programme for emerging items, and the opportunity to reprioritise and refresh will be available at every meeting of the committee, because it's a standing item on the agenda for every meeting. And also the chair will be meeting with the chairs of the scrutiny committees will meet with monthly with the directors and go through what's on the agenda. And we're all at the meetings when we have them on the standing items. We'll be looking for added invitees. Members would like to see particular scope of reports that they want included, things like that. So this is just best practice by the regulators, and it happens in most local authorities that we look at this once a year refresh, but it's a springboard, if you like, for starting the new year. And I just hand back to yourself, Chair, to consider the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Meryl. Did any members wish to speak? No, so it's Councillor Spanswick.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, only to touch on the issue of BREP, which we discussed briefly in the pre-meeting. I know the dates there for the programme, 5th of July, the next meeting, and then it's the 2nd of September. And I wasn't sure whether is there going to need to be a report to this scrutiny, the corporate scrutiny, if there's any change of rules to BREP. Because if that doesn't happen in the July meeting, we're then 2 months into September before BREP starts. And I understand resources and staff is limited time in the day to do things, but I think the BREP report does need to be in
Absolutely.
July. And the other item of the report, which is not there, which has been discussed in the past, and perhaps that's for a future debate, is one on ethical procurement. Because I take it needs to come to corporate scrutiny. It's not suitable, or I recall it wasn't deemed suitable for any particular subject scrutiny.
Right, sorry, just take that one at a time. So the BREP, the review, if you like, of the terms of reference and purpose that came out of the recommendations from the budget process, that will be progressed as a matter of urgency. I take Councillor Spanswick's point that if a report needs to come to COSC, it needs to be done, by the first date on the work programme. We will be having discussions with chairs and prior to that, and coming back to members about the process. And obviously it's critical that we get the dates of the BREP in the calendar for onward, to get those meetings in the calendar for onward consideration. So that's the first point. Sorry, what was the second point?
Ethical procurement.
Yes, ethical procurement. I believe I'll come back. I'll discuss that with the chair, but I do believe that is on the that is actually on the agenda, on the work programme for Governance and Audit Committee and a report going elsewhere, but I need to check on that and discuss with the chair and come back to you as a committee on that point.
Okay, thanks, Mera. Thanks.
Thanks, Meryl. Councillor Gebbie, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I apologise? I did drop out for a lot of that meeting. They've changed my bandwidth on my Wi-Fi now, so that's much better, I think. I have real concerns with that comment, Meryl, and only because we're supposed to have an one council approach. And if we're corporate overview and scrutiny, how can we scrutinise something that we don't see? So I have a problem with that in so much as in relation to procurement. So I appreciate what you're saying, and possibly it's one of those that actually needs to be a joint committee approach. Just a suggestion. And the other thing that I haven't seen anywhere on the agenda is an overview of the decarbonisation agenda, which is vitally important that we get on top of this. And that's not just about budget, that's about strategies as well across the board.
If I take those points separately, Chair, if I may.
Thank you.
Firstly, the ethical procurement. I believe the contract procedure, the report going to governance and audit then for clarification, I believe is the review of the contract procedure rules, which is something within the remit of that committee. If you wanted to put a separate report on the scrutiny work programme on ethical procurement, you know, I don't think there would be a problem with that. And be led by members today. On the topic of decarbonisation, as part of the discussions for the draft work programme for Subject Overview Scrutiny Committee 3, I believe that there is an item on there for that, and I think Councillor Blundell is here today, would agree with me on that, and that's for discussion in the SOC 3 before it comes back to COSC then for endorsing next time.
Councillor Blundell. Councillor Blundell.
Yeah, sorry, it takes a little while for my buttons to work.
Apologies.
No, it's just to inform Councillor Gebbie that it is on the work schedule for SOC 3. Obviously, I can't prejudge what the committee will say in 2 weeks' time. I think we've penciled it in for September, although I am trying to get the September meeting moved. But yes, it is on our agenda, and as always, all members are entitled to visit my committee. I'll have to find out if you're allowed to ask any questions, but as always, I'm quite open. I have an open door policy on my scrutiny committee. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Gebbie?
No, it doesn't really. I'm really sorry, JP. I appreciate that you're going to have a strategy across the authority, but if we're looking at other things, and all sorts comes to this committee, and it should be an overarching policy. So if it's not addressed by each committee with each strategy, we're not going to get anywhere. So I have a big problem with it. So yeah, I do. I don't think we look at a one council approach, very definitely. And I'm sorry I'm banging on about it. I really don't care. It's very important.
So just to clarify, sorry, Chair, if I may. So if you were to have ethical procurement put on the work programme for COSC today as a proposal, and the decarbonisation is on the SOC 3 proposed forward work programme, does that not address those 2 points? Can I just clarify?
Well, no, I don't think so, because we haven't got the one council approach. We keep being told we have to look at things as a one council across every committee. Now, ethical procurement, decarbonisation agenda affects every committee that sits on this council. And if we don't pay due regard to it, if we don't pay our due diligence with every report that comes to us, then we're not doing a one council approach. And I appreciate what JP said. I can come to his committee and observe. But I don't know actually what I'm going to be observing, JP, because this needs to be linked into everything, and I don't know where it's going. I as a committee member on COSC, which is supposed to be an overview of all committees, I don't believe that as a committee we have that overview.
Just to clarify, once the committees had looked at their own work programmes, they would be coming back to COSC for the overview prioritisation. I'm not sure, we can't look at everything in every committee, so I'm not sure. Are you suggesting that it comes to COSC then, Councillor Geddy?
Can I make another suggestion then? That as part of every report that comes to us from whichever committee, it actually mentions and addresses and deals with ethical procurement and the decarbonisation agenda. There's also something to be, I know that the way that they're actually looking to change our reports, Meryl, because they need to actually put something in about the socio-economic duty as well. So I don't know if that will address my concerns, because we need to be addressing these with each policy, with each decision, with each strategy. It doesn't matter where it's from, education, social services, it doesn't matter. Right,
I'm with you now, Councillor Gerby. Right, so the actual revision of the reports for the socio-economic duty has happened. That has changed now in the cover reports that we've got before you today. Obviously, these reports are more housekeeping reports, but there's an item in there now. I think it's item. It's been replaced. If the committee today is making a recommendation that the reports then to each committee include a commentary on ethical procurement and decarbonisation, you can make that recommendation.
Can I suggest that we make that recommendation, please, Meryl? And can I also make a recommendation, because we've asked for it previously and it still isn't happening, is that we have an executive summary on each report that we receive.
Thanks, Councillor Gerby. I think that's a really good point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, if I could just ask that go into the recommendation, because that affects the corporate template that we all have to use. So in order for that to change, we need that to change. So
I've been asking now for it, Meryl, for 3 years, and it was agreed, and it still hasn't happened.
I appreciate that, but the reports today are very simple reports on housekeeping items, and the reports that we get from other departments then are in the agreed corporate template. So for that to happen, it needs to be changed.
Then, please, and would the committee support me with that recommendation, please? Thank you very much.
Are there anybody want to comment on Councillor Gerby's recommendation? Are we happy for that recommendation to go forward?
Chair, I got my hand up. I'd just like to support Councillor Gerby's points on the ethical procurement, because there will be legislation coming forward with the Welsh Government, I think, as part of their forward work programme for government on that. So I think it has got an important role, and I think we have got an important role as a committee in overseeing that as well. Thank you. So I'd like to support her position on the ethical procurement aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. Councillor Gerby, you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Just very quickly, we also need to show due consideration to the Workforce Partnership Act that will be coming into effect, and any contracts that come into effect will be, do you know what I mean, is going to have an impact. We need to start looking at that now. If that's the way we're going to have to do our business, we should be doing our business that way now. Thank you very much. And I don't know what the rest of the committee feel about that.
Thank you, Councillor Gerby. Meryl. Has Meryl disappeared?
Sorry, Chair.
Hello, Meryl. Are those things that we should be talking about off this committee for future discussion?
I think if the committee makes the recommendations, Chair, and then we'll take them forward.
The recommendations that Jane suggested about the decarbonisation and the socio-economic duty, and also the executive summary, I think we're all happy to go forward. And then Jane made the point about the workforce contract as well.
I'm not sure, Chair, but I would put them forward with the same recommendation to our advisors then, to come back on.
Thank you, Meryl. Councillor Shaw, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've listened to the Councillor Gebby's proposals, and I think they're all very, very sensible, and the template should be adjusted to suit. I can see no reason not to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I think we're all in agreement. Is that everything you need, Meryl, on this item?
Yes, Chair, if nobody's got any further points to make.
I've got no further hands up. So item 9 is urgent items. There are no items of business in this respect, of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4 of the Council procedures. But so I think we can bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much all for attending.
And thanks, Meryl and colleagues.